Normally it thrummed with the voices of courtiers, the measured footfalls of guards in their ceremonial armor, and the low, constant chants of priests weaving blessings over the queen's halls. On this day, the silence was suffocating. At the center of the great medical chamber lay Princess Calera, daughter of Queen Seralith, her once vibrant skin now dulled to a pale lavender sheen. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven gasps, every breath sounding like a fragile thing ready to break. Round her bed stood half a dozen of the Dominion's finest healers, cloaked in deep emerald robes, their hands glowing faintly with biotic energy. And yet none dared to move closer. The wound at Calera's side was unlike anything they had encountered. What should have been a clean scar from an assassin's blade had become a festering abyss of blackened veins spreading outward like a spider's web. The toxin had been crafted by enemies who understood the Jorathi, too well designed to bypass their immune system. Designed to mock their healing rituals, designed to kill slowly. One of the elder healers stepped forward, bowed his head, and spoke in a voice heavy with shame. "Your Radiance, we cannot proceed. To touch her blood is to risk defilement." The toxin he swallowed hard. "It consumes all remedies we know." Queen Seralith sat rigid in her throne, her long, dark horns curving back like a crown wrought from bone. Her golden eyes burned with fury, yet her face remained carved from stone. She was a monarch who had ruled through wars, famines, and betrayals, a sovereign whose wrath had broken fleets and silenced empires. But at that moment, she was not merely a queen, she was a mother watching her only child slip away. "You call yourselves healers?" she hissed, her voice carrying the weight of thunder. "You wear the robes of wisdom, you chant the hymns of your ancestors' end, yet my daughter dies while you tremble like hatchlings." None of them dared respond. The silence deepened, broken only by the rasping breath of the princess. At the edge of the chamber, half in shadow, stood a figure who did not belong. His armor was scuffed, his uniform faded. His presence among the court was tolerated only because of necessity, not respect. He was human. Dr. Elias Ward had once been a combat medic in the Terran fleets, patching men and women together under fire, stitching wounds with one hand while holding a rifle in the other. He had seen battlefields where the ground itself seemed to bleed, had watched comrades scream their last with his hands pressed over their wounds. And though the wars were long behind him now, instinct remained. He had been living in exile, tolerated but distrusted by the Jorathi. Humans were still considered an anomaly as species, from a death world that survived more by stubbornness than refinement. They were admired for their resilience, yes, but rarely respected. Yet when Elias saw the princess lying pale upon that obsidian bed, her life measured in shallow breaths, something inside him refused to remain still. He stepped forward. His boots echoed sharply against the polished stone floor. Every alien head turned in shock. The guards shifted, weapons half drawn, their mandibles twitching in warning. "I can save her," Elias said simply. The words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then the chamber erupted in hisses, shouts, and curses. A human dares blasphemy. He must be executed for such insolence. The healers recoiled in horror at the thought of their sacred princess being touched by crude alien hands. To them, humans were butchers, who used knives where others used light, who poured chemicals into veins instead of weaving biotic harmonies. But Elias did not flinch. His gaze stayed fixed on the queen. His voice was calm, steady, carrying none of the panic that gripped the chamber. "I've seen this kind of wound before," he said. "Different species, same toxin. I know what to do. If you let me, I can keep her alive." Queen Seralith's golden eyes pinned him like a blade through the chest. She searched his face for hesitation, for arrogance, for weakness. She found none. Instead, she saw something she had not seen in any of her healers, the quiet certainty of someone who had walked beside death too many times to fear it. For a long moment, the queen said nothing. Her court seethed around her, voices rising in outrage. Yet when she finally raised her hand, the chamber fell silent instantly. "Let him approach," she commanded. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guards hesitated, uncertain if they had heard correctly, until the Queen's voice cracked like thunder once more. I said, "Let him approach." And so Elias Ward, a human with nothing left to lose, stepped forward toward the dying princess, carrying nothing but a battered medical kit and the stubborn determination that had kept his kind alive for centuries. The fate of the heir to the Jorathi throne now rested in the hands of an exile, an outcast, a human, and in that moment, history itself began to shift. The chamber seemed smaller as Elias stepped forward, though it was vast enough to house an entire war council. The polished obsidian floor reflected the pale light of the hovering lanterns, casting distorted ripples of his shadow as he approached the bed. Every Jorathi eye tracked him, the room a coil of fury and suspicion ready to strike. He could feel their hatred pressing against him like a physical weight. Humans were tolerated in the Dominion only because their resilience had proven useful in wars. Their ability to survive poisons and adapt to alien environments, making them effective in places others feared to tread. But to let one touch the Queen's daughter, that was no mere breach of tradition. It was sacrilege. Still, Elias moved with steady purpose. He had walked across battlefields where shrapnel rained from the skies, and medics were killed for daring to kneel beside the wounded. Compared to that, this room filled with snarling nobles and trembling healers was nothing you dare claim. "You can heal her?" The Queen's voice struck the silence like the edge of a blade. Elias stopped at the foot of the bed, meeting her gaze without bowing. He was no diplomat. He had never been good with titles and rituals, but he knew how to speak the language of life and death. "I don't claim," he answered evenly. "I know. I've seen wounds like this. Different species, same enemy. I know what to do." The healers hissed in unison, their mandibles clicking in outrage. One of them stepped forward, voice quivering with anger. "This is madness," he speaks. "Of cutting, of poisons, of crude instruments. Will desecrate the royal blood." Another added sharply, "Better she dies untouched than corrupted by such savagery." But Queen Seralith did not look away from Elias. Her golden eyes were as hard as forged steel. She had ruled for centuries, and in that time she had seen countless creatures quail before her gaze. Yet this human did not waver. He stood like a man with nothing left to lose, and perhaps that was the truth. At last she gave a single, sharp nod. "Then prove it." The words fell like a hammer, silencing the chamber. Elias exhaled slowly, then set down his battered medical kit at the princess's side. The sound of metal latches snapping open seemed deafening in the stillness. Inside were the tools of his trade things the Jorathi regarded as barbaric curiosities. Clamps and gauze, syringes filled with strange fluids, vials of antibiotics, rolls of suturing thread. To them it was a box of crude torture. To Elias, it was hope. He peeled away the ceremonial wrappings that covered the princess's wound. The stench hit him first, sweet and acrid, the smell of flesh losing its battle against corruption. Even hardened warriors turned their faces away when they saw it. The infection had spread far deeper than it appeared from the outside. Black veins spidered outward from the wound, pulsing faintly as the toxin crept further into her system. Elise's jaw tightened. He had seen this before, on soldiers poisoned by engineered biotoxins meant to cripple entire units. He knew what would happen if it wasn't stopped. The organs would fail one by one, till the victim suffocated in her own blood. "She doesn't need your prayers," Elias muttered, more to himself than to them. "She needs drainage, counteragents." In time, he worked quickly. With practiced hands, he cleaned the wound with antiseptic that fizzed and sizzled against her alien skin. The healers gasped in horror, mistaking the reaction for further damage, but Elias ignored them. He'd seen that same look of fear on green recruits the first time they watched him pour alcohol into a wound. Next, he prepared an injection. He drew a small vial of serum from his Catan experimental cocktail of human antibodies he had carried for years, a last resort designed for unknown poisons. The idea was simple. Human blood had a way of adapting, of fighting even when it shouldn't. If it could buy her system time, she might survive. "This is reckless," one of the healers cried, stepping forward as Elias readied the syringe. "You could kill her instantly." Elias's voice was calm but unyielding. She's already dying. Doing nothing will finish the job. At least this gives her a chance. Without waiting for permission, he slid the needle into her arm and pushed the serum into her veins. The princess's body arched, a sharp cry escaping her lips as her system reacted violently to the foreign substance. The guards nearly rushed forward, but Queen Seralith's raised hand froze them in place. Kalira trembled, her chest heaving as though she were caught between two worlds. For long, agonizing moments, her body convulsed, her breath ragged, the toxin and the serum warring within her, and then slowly her breathing steadied. The spreading blackness at her side halted, not reversed, not healed, but halted, as if the toxin had Fina. The human's claim had been simple: she'll live if I stay with her. But the truth was far from simple. Elias Ward had seen patients pulled back from the brink only to slip away again hours later. He knew the fight was not over. What he had done was not a curate, was a stay of execution. The toxin was still in her body, still fighting, still waiting for weakness. If he faltered even once, Princess Kalira would die. For 3 nights and days, Elias did not leave her side. The palace chamber became his battlefield. He positioned himself beside her bed, his battered medical kit always open, his supplies spread like weapons in an arsenal. Every hour he checked her pulse, her breathing, the slow ebb and flow of the black veins around the wound. When her fever surged, he drenched her skin with cloth soaked in cool water, unbothered by the horrified gasps of the Jorathi healers, who insisted such shock could kill her. Elias knew better. He had kept soldiers alive through fevers that could melt the mind, through heat that could boil the blood. When her body threatened to shut down, he improvised further. He bled himself into a basin, separating plasma and cells with crude tools, and transfused a portion into her veins. To the aliens watching, it was insanity, a violation of every sacred law of blood purity. But Elias trusted in humanity's strange resilience, the way his species adapted to nearly anything, even foreign poisons. If his blood could carry even the faintest resistance, it might give hers a chance to fight. The palace was a fortress of whispers. Word had spread that the queen's heir was in the hands of a human. Nobles muttered in rage, priests prayed loudly in protest, guards stood stiff with unease. Some argued the human should be killed before he contaminated her further. Others, quietly and only in corners, admitted that the princess's breathing had steadied since his arrival. Queen Seralith herself sat vigil often, silent as carved stone. She said little, did less. But her gaze never left Elias. She watched how he worked without hesitation, how he risked his own body without thought, how he never once looked at her daughter as a symbol or a prize, only as a patient he refused to lose. For the first time in centuries, Seralith could not decide whether she was watching madness or something that approached courage. On the second night, Kalira's fever spiked to terrifying levels. Her body convulsed, her eyes rolling back, the black veins spreading like wildfire. Even Elias faltered then, his heart hammering in his chest. For the first time since stepping forward, doubt clawed at him. What if I can't do this?
What if
I've only made her suffer longer? But the doubt lasted only a heartbeat. He gritted his teeth, grabbed a blade from his kit, and reopened the wound to flush it directly with antiseptic. The hiss of flesh against liquid filled the chamber, and the princess let out a strangled cry that made even hardened warriors turn away. Elias's jaw tightened. He had done worse in war. He would do worse again if it meant she breathed tomorrow. By dawn of the 3rd day, the battle began to shift. The spreading veins no longer advanced. The fever broke, her body drenched in sweat but calmer. Her breathing evened into something that sounded almost normal, and then on the 4th morning her eyes fluttered open. The chamber fell silent. Even the priests hushed their mutterings. Queen Seralith, who had not blinked in hours, leaned forward with a sharp intake of breath. Mother. The word was faint, hoarse, but alive. Seralith trembled. For the first time in centuries of rule, the steel mask cracked. Her voice wavered as she leaned closer. I am here, child. Kalira's gaze shifted weakly toward the figure seated beside her bed. Confusion filled her pale violet eyes as she took in the human with his scarred hands, his hollow eyes, his bloodied bandages wrapped around his own arm. "Who are you?" she whispered. Elias leaned back, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. His hands were shaking from sleeplessness, his uniform stained with blood, hers and his own. Yet his voice, when he spoke, carried only quiet certainty. "No one important," he said softly. "Just the one who wouldn't let you die." The news spread through the palace like wildfire. The princess lived, against every prediction, against the paralysis of the Dominion's finest healers. She had opened her eyes. But the victory did not bring peace. Instead, it cracked the Dominion's halls of power down the middle. Nobles hissed in disbelief. Priests denounced the recovery as an abomination, insisting no alien hand, least of all a human, should have touched the sacred blood of the royal line. Healers raged at the insult to their order, calling Elias's crude methods desecration disguised as healing. Yet others, quietly and carefully, admitted what their eyes could not deny. The princess was breathing because of him. For the first time in generations, the Dominion's court was not united under the queen's will. It seethed, split between tradition and truth. Elias Ward knew none of the politics mattered to him. He had expected outrage the moment he touched the princess, and now that she lived, he expected worse. A medic never saved lives for glory. He saved them because the alternative was to stand by while someone bled out. If the price for her life was his own, he had already made peace with that. But Queen Saralith was not so quick to decide. She summoned Elias to the throne room on the 5th day of Kailira's recovery. He entered under guard, unarmed but unflinching, walking past rows of nobles, generals, priests, and healers gathered in a semicircle around the throne. Their eyes burned into him hatred, disgust, suspicion, even fear. To them, he was a living contradiction, a barbarian who had succeeded where their most revered experts had failed. Elias stopped at the foot of the throne. The chamber was silent, save for the rustle of robes and the faint scrape of claws against the floor. Queen Saralith rose slowly from her seat. She was every inch the monarch, her horns sweeping back like carved obsidian, her robes flowing with the weight of authority. Her golden gaze pinned him in place, sharp enough to cut through steel. "You saved my daughter's life," she said, her voice measured, deliberate. "And yet, in doing so, you have broken every law of blood and tradition that governs my people." Elias held her gaze. "I wasn't here to respect your laws. I was here to keep her alive." Gasps rippled through the chamber. A lesser being would have begged, groveled, tried to justify himself. Elias simply stated the truth as he saw it. One of the high priests stepped forward, voice dripping venom. "This human has corrupted the air with his filth. His punishment must be death. Nothing less can cleanse this dishonor." Others echoed, demanding execution, exile, erasure from record. But before the queen could answer, a voice rang out, clear but soft, from the side of the throne. Enough. Every head turned. Princess Kailira stood, still weak, still pale, but alive. The effort cost her. Her hands trembled, her legs shook, but she stepped forward nonetheless. Placing herself between Elias and her mother's judgment, he saved. "Me," Kailira said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the chamber. "That is the truth. You call him defiler, barbarian, savage, but none of you moved when I lay dying. None of you dared. Only he did." A stunned silence fell. The court had never heard the heir speak with such defiance. Kailira turned her eyes toward her mother. "Would you let truth be silenced, mother? Would you punish the one who did what no other would?" Queen Saralith's expression did not change, but her hand curled against the armrest of her throne. Her daughter's words cut deeply, not because they challenged her authority, but because they forced her to confront her own heart. Saralith had watched this human bleed for her child, had seen him face death without flinching, had felt the raw certainty in his every action. Yet she was queen, bound by tradition, by law, by the weight of centuries. If she praised him, she risked tearing apart the foundation of her rule. If she condemned him, she risked betraying her daughter's life. At last she spoke, her voice Carrying the heaviness of a monarch caught between crown and heart, you risk much, child, she said to Kalira. Kalira's voice softened but did not falter. So did he. The court erupted in murmurs, but the queen silenced them with a raised hand.
Us.
She turned her gaze back to Elias. For a long, suffocating moment, the two simply stared at one another, the queen of an empire and the medic of a dying world, bound by the fragile thread of a single life saved. You have done what no other dared, Saralith said at last. You saved what is dearest to me, and yet if I honor you, I shatter tradition. If I destroy you, I shatter my daughter's heart. Her words hung in the air like a sentence not yet passed. Elias Monroe exhaled, his hands trembling from the strain of hours spent in meticulous, unbroken concentration. The princess's breathing was steady now, her skin less pallid. The wound sealed with a strange blend of human ingenuity and alien physiology. Around him, dozens of eyes watched, eyes filled with awe, disbelief, and something he never thought he'd see directed at a human: respect. For the first time since stepping onto this alien world, Elias allowed himself to lean back and feel the crushing weight of exhaustion. He had nothing left to give, and yet he had given enough. The queen, draped in ceremonial regalia, but stripped of her usual commanding posture, moved closer, massive frame lowered until her head was level with Elias. Her voice, when it came, was not the thunder that shook palaces and moved armies, but the gentle tremor of a mother who had nearly lost her child. You risked what no one else would. Why? She asked, her tone equal parts suspicion and wonder. Elias glanced at the princess, then back at the queen. His throat felt dry, but he spoke anyway. Because she needed me, because standing by while someone suffers. That's not what we do, not where I come from. The words were simple. Perhaps too simple for the grandeur of the occasion. Yet simplicity was what carried weight across the silence. The queen regarded him for a long moment, her alien gaze unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she lowered herself fully to the ground, bowing her head toward him. Gasps filled the chamber. For a monarch whose spine was never meant to bend, this was a gesture beyond politics, beyond diplomacy. The House of Vara owes you a debt, she declared, her voice echoing through the hall. One that cannot be measured in jewels or systems. You have done what no other dared. You have preserved the bloodline. The healers who had refused creatures of reputation and pride looked down in shame. The guards who had prepared to kill Elias hours before now stared as though seeing a ghost given flesh. The courtiers whispered of omens and prophecies, of ancient lines that foretold salvation from beyond the stars. But Elias didn't care about any of that. He only cared that the princess would live. The queen's hand, massive and clawed, extended toward him, not as a threat, but as an offering. Elias hesitated, then placed his small, weary human hand against her palm. The chamber erupted in a mixture of cries, shouts, and chants. To them, it was a bond of history being forged. To him, it was just the handshake of someone who had done his duty. The days that followed were surreal. Word of the event spread far beyond the palace. Across the empire, stories were told of the human who touched the untouchable and lived. Priests whispered that he carried a spirit immune to curses. Soldiers claimed his bravery rivaled any warrior's. Mothers spoke his name as a blessing over their children. Yet, Elias himself felt none of that glory. He was confined to quarters, not as a prisoner, but as an honored guest. Guards escorted him, not with weapons drawn, but with ceremonial bows. The alien court provided him feasts, but he could barely eat. His mind consumed with one question: what now? When the queen summoned him again, he expected judgment, perhaps exile, or worse, entanglement in alien politics. Instead, she presented him with a proposition. You saved my daughter, she said, but you also saved this empire. For her survival secures our stability. I will not pretend to understand your people, your ways, or your strange courage. But I would have you stay. Stay, Elias asked carefully. As royal healer, she clarified. No alien healer can match what you have done. You saw more than a wound. You saw life, and you preserved it. It was tempting.
Oh.
To be honored, remembered, even revered in a place where moments ago he was expendable. Wanted most to continue healing wherever he was needed. Not bound to a throne, he bowed not in subservience, but in respect. I'll stay as long as you need me, Majesty, but not forever. I don't serve crowns, I serve life. The queen studied him and then, for the first time, smiled. When Elias finally stepped outside the palace walls, escorted by guards who treated him more like a living legend than a fragile human, he looked up at the alien sky. He realized then that something had changed, not just for the Empire, but for the galaxy.